Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Petra Tanos from the Tropical Forest Alliance. We're going to get started with today's presentation. This webinar is part of the Tropical Forest Alliance's Jurisdictional Exchange Network, which is an informal community of practice that brings together folks that are working to advance jurisdictional and landscape approaches to achieve deforestation-free commodity supply chains. And today we're going to be looking at the PCI in Mato Grosso, and we have an absolutely fantastic group of panelists today. Thank you very much for joining. I hope that in these times everyone on the call is keeping well and safe. And I will now hand it over to my colleague Fabiola Zerbini, who heads up the TFA's work across Latin America, to take us through today's webinar. Fabiola, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Petra. Welcome, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you at this webinar to talk about the PCI. Just a few instructions before we start. We will have the Q&A chat open during the entire call, so you can write your comments, you can write your questions. And the speakers will also be able to answer during the webinar presentation. The speakers, it's a group of people who have been working a lot and very hardly to really make PCI as a model for the world as a jurisdictional program. So I'm really glad to introduce you to Fernando Sampaio. He's the current director of PCI. Dan Napstead from Earth Innovation Institute, Daniela Mariuso, the Latin America Director of IDH, Marcela Paranhos, who works for the finance program here in IDH Latin America as well, and Katie Anderson from EDF. I'm really now open the presentation, so I'm glad to invite Fernando Sampaio to make your opening and start the presentation to all of us. Thank you.
Well, hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Fernando Sampaio, and just to get started and to give you something to think about and the reason why we are working at the PCI, I'd like to present some important data on the role of Brazil and Mato Grosso on agricultural commodities production and what we are planning for the future. Can you pass on? Yeah. So when you look at the history of the world and you think about the important migration movement of people, one of the most important migration movements happened in the last decades in China, and was the migration of millions of Chinese peasants from the countryside to the cities. And on that transition, their income was double or tripled in relation to what they were getting on the countryside. And this process generates a huge demand for consumer goods and food. This process happened in China in the last decades. It's happening in Southeast Asia, in India, and in the emerging economies of the Middle East, and will happen in a more or less degree in Africa. So what we are calling the new Silk Road is, the connection between all this emerging market and demand for food. And South America is actually the region in the world with the best possibilities of attending that demand. And Brazil has a big role to play there. We have more available water, arable land, and human and technological resources in agriculture. So a lot of this growing demand for meat in general, beef, chicken, pork, and also the demand for soy will grow in the next years. And even when you look in the scenario of the pandemic that we are living right now, is a scenario of impoverishment of some nations and more managed and controlled trade. What we'll see, of course, these numbers of Rabobank were produced before the pandemic. But when you look at right now, on the next slide, I can show you that if you look at the first 4 months of 2020, the World Trade Organization is projecting a drop in the volume of trade flow for all countries. And in Brazil is perhaps one of the less affected countries in the G20 group. Brazil actually increased its total exports in this 4-month period. But if you look only to agricultural exports, we are exporting more beef and more soy, especially to Asia. So there is, you know, a significant role for Brazil guaranteeing this affordable food security for these countries that can that is a vital part of the recovery after the pandemic. And when we talk Brazil, we are talking about Mato Grosso. Mato Grosso is the agriculture powerhouse of Brazil, is the largest producers of beef, soy, cotton, and other commodities in Brazil. It has the size of Germany and France together, and still we still have 60% of the state covered in forests. So the big question that we see right now, the question that is on the hearts and minds of people that's thinking about the future of the planet is whether Brazil can do it. So on the next slide, this is a provocation. You know, this is the question that everyone is asking. If the world is going to have all this demand for beef, for soy, can this demand be attended in a sustainable way, or mitigating climate change, protecting biodiversity and the forests that we have? And we believe we can do that. So the idea, what we are going to talk about it today, is what Mato Grosso is doing to make sure that we have a forest positive future and that we can have this food security, the food production in balance with the conservation of natural resources and the inclusion of traditional populations, indigenous people, and smallholders on this process of economic development. The food production is not only essential for the food future of the planet, but is also essential for the Brazilian economic development. And the steps that we are taking in Mato Grosso and that we want to share with you today is to let everyone be aware that, you know, the strategy, the PCI strategy, is a new model of governance, is a new model of development where we are trying to put all the elements together that we need in order to guarantee this forest positive future. So thank you very much for being here with us today. And we are going now to explain what we are doing.
Thank you, Fernando, so much. I think the main message, no, we really can do that. And in fact, it started many years ago. So then, can you please bring us your thoughts, how did Mato Grosso go from Amazon leader in deforestation to leader in reduction in deforestation, please? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be on this panel, and thanks so much to TFA for organizing it. I think it's a very timely topic. We all need some stories of optimism these days. And I just want to call out first that Mato Grosso has been the site of amazing innovation. We all hear about the CAR, the Rural Environmental Registry of Brazil. It started in Mato Grosso and has its roots in MT Legal, and before that, the SLAPR farm level licensing system. We hear about the soy moratorium. It was launched in Cuiabá on the 26th of July in 2006. We hear about this amazing new consultation process, statewide consultation of 43 indigenous peoples groups, and you know, Mato Grosso leading the way on that, but also for production. It's where soybeans were figured out how to grow soybeans in the wet, damp climate of the Amazon region. And so it's been as this laboratory of innovation, but it's also been a place of tremendous tension, partly because Brazilian farmers are held to a higher standard in many ways. They have to comply with the forest code, a forest code that was renewed or revisited, reformed in 2012. But basically, you have to have 80% of your land in forest if you're in the Amazon part of Brazil. And there was a frustration that grew among farmers in Mato Grosso when deforestation started to come down so radically, more than in any other state in Brazil, of, well, will there be an upside for me? Will the forest that I'm conserving on my land bring me benefits, bring me some incentives, give me greater market access? And that core frustration is one of the things behind the PCI, and one of the challenges today, because those incentives really still are not arriving at the farm gate. But this timeline shows some of the really key moments in history leading up to the PCI launch in Paris in 2015. Mato Grosso is one of only 2 subnational governments to receive a results-based payment contract with Germany and the UK. The other one is Acre, also in Brazil. That was the first real recognition in terms of a fairly large amount of funding for everything Mato Grosso has been putting together to bring deforestation down. Next slide, please. If we look at PCI, one thing we don't talk too much about is it as a climate mitigation policy. Fernando is going to go into the details of how the PCI works, but basically Mato Grosso's sets of goals, and the unique thing here is that the farm sector was at the table. The farm sector joined the PCI at its inception. So some of that polarization that had been creating tension between farmers and environmental interests historically was solved for a while at least. And behind it, though, is the idea that by 2030, Mato Grosso would be zero net deforestation, zero net emissions, and would keep about 4 gigatons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. Historically, Mato Grosso has already kept 3 gigatons, more than 3 gigatons out of the atmosphere. Less than 1% of that contribution to climate change mitigation has been compensated in some way. So there's still this imbalance, this frustration continues. I think we're getting close to some ways of recognizing and rewarding the contribution of the farm sector to this amazing story. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I think that everybody here in some way agrees that one of the key conditions for a successful jurisdictional program is a combination of enablers, conditions, and the group of stakeholders who really decided to work together to look to the territory and share a vision, now a common vision for the territory. So Daniela Mariuso from IDH, please, can you bring your great experience now and thoughts about the PCI on this?
Yes,
topic?
Thank you, Fabiola. Thank you, TFA, for putting all this together. And thank you, Dan and Fernando, for this brilliant introduction. As we could see, there was a very long journey before we got where we are at this moment with PCI. But before I start, I just want to say that I'm very happy to be here and to see all of you, that you are well, and I miss most of you all. So it's a moment that's very important, that we are all together and see that everything that's good is also happening. So I'm here to say that normally when people ask me about PCI and how it was created, the most frequent question is, what were the key factors that made PCI possible? How all that elements were put together and made it this program that we see now in 2020. So it's a very, very important question, because most of the people that were not so close to the process, they think it was a very fast result, but actually everything that's done said about this 10 years, 2005, 2015, of discussions, tensions, and all the kind of frustrations and achievements. It was a kind of incubation for the result that we had, that is PCI. And why I say that, because in Mato Grosso, there was a lot of dialogue in that years between NGOs, between farmers and companies. And this created a real trust environment for everyone to dialogue and engage to build a solution. So I think the first key factor that made PCI possible is that in that period, it was a very, very rich moment where everyone was engaged. So if we say it would be possible to build PCI today, I think that would make a lot of difference, because today we see the polarization, and maybe it would not be possible. So it's specific from Mato Grosso, a lot of dialogue before we got to PCI. And I think the second important factor was in that beginning of 2015 in March, there was a very, very friendly environmental political environment. So what's happened is that the new governor at that moment opened doors to talk to the society, to talk to companies and farmers and NGOs. And this was able because he also put some very, very powerful secretaries to lead his program. So this is very important to know, that the political environment was also key to make all this happening. And so in March 2015, there were the first workshop where we had about 12 representatives of the different sectors of the society. So maybe if Gianluca just move to the next one. Yeah, so it's important to know that there was a real good willing from all these stakeholders that are here, civil societies, representatives of the farmers associations, public ministry, government and private sector. And this generates a lot of dialogue and discussions. And also the name of the PCI was debated because there was no name. So the target was to bring PCI to COP 21 in Paris. And so the deadline was arriving, and then everyone started to get a consensus on how to name it and what were the targets that would be presented. And so that was really an exercise of patience and consensus and a lot of individual collaboration. And so this was the beginning of PCI. So the two key messages I want to say is that it wasn't by coincidence. It was created before more than 10 years of dialogue. And it was also enabled by the environmental, the political environments at that moment. So those are my few words. And I think we go to Fernando right now.
Thank you, Daniela. Fernando, so back into you now. Where we are, now how PCI is structured, what can we say that has good results from the 10 or even more years that Daniela, Dan, and also you brought to us. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Fabiola and Daniela. So the PCI was launched at the COP21 in Paris, but what happened after that? And there's, then there was no recipe on how to build a jurisdictional initiative, but what I'm going to tell you about is some key elements that we managed to put together in these years after the PCI launch. So these are some of the elements that we consider important for building a jurisdictional initiative. And the first one is about the coalition. We had that since the beginning. All the actors that Daniela just spoke about, involved in the discussion. So in the next slide, we see, the coalition is the first key element of a jurisdictional initiative. We must have the relevant stakeholders. Were able to get the political leadership of the governor himself embracing the strategy and putting the government bodies and secretariats together in the same strategy. So we had the coalition since the beginning. The construction of the PCI was a collective effort and a participative effort. Everybody was contributing to the discussion. And the coalition was formalized in 2016 by a state decree from the governor, creating the PCI State Committee. So the PCI State Committee put together the farmers' representatives, the private sector, the civil society, and the government. And the committee decided that they need a secretariat. And this is important. This is why my position actually came up. So I am executive director of the PCI, but I do not work for Mato Grosso government. I work for the coalition of members. So the secretariat was one step further to implementation of the PCI. So you have someone that is facilitating the discussion and make sure that the wheel is turning. But there are two very important issues that I think we must notice. One is that about communication. It's very complex to explain what a jurisdictional initiative is. And when you have a lot of different groups of stakeholders and everyone has its own interest, we have to make sure that everyone is getting the right message. What are the benefits of this collective effort for everyone? So the communication is a key element for the success of the coalition. And the second one is about inclusion of vulnerable populations. Indigenous people, for example, they were not present at the start of the PCI. The smallholders were represented actually by the government, but even if they were not in the beginning at the PCI discussions, we succeeded in the years after the PCI launch to have two different processes happening in Mato Grosso and that are related to the inclusion of these vulnerable populations. So in the next one, we see the first one was about the construction of the family farming state plan, so the plan for the smallholders. And this was built in a series of consultations in different regions of Mato Grosso, so everyone had a voice there on the priorities for the smallholders in Mato Grosso. This was conducted by the State Secretariat for Family Farming with the support of IPAM and other organizations. And the second process was a consultation for the indigenous people in Mato Grosso under the Red Early Movers Program construction. It's on the next slide. So here we had the 43 different ethnic groups of Mato Grosso being consulted and also about their priorities. And the results of this consultation, we are now getting, putting together in our PCI priorities to be part of the state effort. And this was done with a huge effort from organizations like ICV, German cooperation for the Red Early Movers program. So this is a huge process with no precedents in Brazil, I believe. So next one. So the next one is about the shared vision. We talked about, how we want to bring this balance to Mato Grosso between production, conservation, social inclusion. And this vision is materialized on this set of SMART targets, 21 SMART targets. So the key word here is consensus. So this was built with the input of all these stakeholders. And these are things that everyone agrees on. Everyone agrees to make livestock production more efficient. Everyone agrees to expand agriculture over degraded areas. Everyone agrees to reduce deforestation, to stop illegality, to implement the forest code that we have to do it anyway. Everyone agrees to create compensation mechanisms for deforestation, for the legal deforestation, with granting more access to technology, technical assistance, credit, solving the land tenure issues for the smallholders. So this set of targets, this represents the shared vision of PCI. Next one. So we have the set of targets. The other key element that we are going to talk about is monitoring. We have to measure if we are making progress or not. We have to be more transparent, to incorporate this transparency into the government agenda. So we developed indicators for each one of these targets. We are producing reports on the evolution of these targets. And this year we are conducting a process of evaluation to see, you know, what we can improve, what are the new priorities, what are the hotspots for action inside the territory of Mato Grosso. We also developed together with Earth Innovation and the Committee for Monitoring from PCI, a dashboard that is on, you know, PCImonitor.org. You can access that and have all the information on the monitoring system. Next one. And after monitoring, the other key element is about planning. You know, and the first thing we did was to take a look in Mato Grosso and see who is already doing something. So when we looked into the territory of Mato Grosso, we mapped more than 200 different initiatives from the government, from the producers, from the civil society, people that were already working in projects related to the PCI goals. So I believe this is the same for every other landscape and jurisdiction. You already have a lot of people doing something that is good, you know, for this forest positive future, to conciliate production and conservation. So the first thing was to know, you know, who is doing something. And the next thing was about defining priority actions. What do we need to do in order to accelerate progress towards our targets? So we defined some cross-cutting issues that had to be addressed. So based on our PCI goals, on the initiative that we already had on the field, these 5 cross-cutting themes: financing, environmental regularization, land tenure, market access, technology, and good practices. So what we have to do in each one of them. And then already we mapped a lot of proposals that were out there, proposals from the farmers associations, proposals from the civil society, proposals for changes in regulations, for action in some of these issues. So we gathered those proposals, and from there, we defined some priority actions to be implemented. And when you look at this period between 2016 and last year, 2019, a lot of these actions were starting or implemented in Mato Grosso. We had a plan for control of deforestation, the plan for the family farmers, the RED system working, and RED resources coming to Mato Grosso. So we had a lot of these actions happening. And like I said, this year we're going to make an evaluation process to define new priority actions for the next years. So the next one. Yeah, and a lot of those actions were made possible using key partnerships that we have since the beginning. So since PCI was launched in Paris, Mato Grosso got the attention of several of these actors that want to help Mato Grosso to achieve its vision. So IDH was the first one to step in and to say, you know, I'm going to help PCI governance and the structure. So it was a crucial part for the continuation and maintenance of the PCI. The Red Early Movers program that was offered by Germany, and then later the United Kingdom joined in a co-financing these projects. It's the first time Mato Grosso actually had some investments coming from the carbon the reduction emissions of the state deforestation. The United Nations had a program called PAGE, and they also stepped in to say, you know, we want to implement this in Mato Grosso. It's a program that is, the objective is to create green jobs. TFA invited Mato Grosso to join the alliance. I think it was the first subnational state, I don't know if in Latin America, of the whole world, to join the alliance. Carrefour announced a partnership with the state because they were interested in PCI, and they are today, you know, the first company actually investing and say, I want to make this investment in Mato Grosso because of PCI, and I think this is good for my supply chains. We had already Fundo Amazonia supporting different actions in the state, in the government and outside the government. KfW also supporting the Ready Removers program, but with other programs like supporting CAR in the federal government, and that was also benefiting the state. The Governor's Task Force, of course. The World Bank, you know, the World Bank came here to help the fiscal crisis of Mato Grosso, and among the conditions for the loan that Mato Grosso did was the formalization of the PCI Institute. So this gave a big push to the state and to the PCI right now, and of course all the impact funds that are making deals, investing, and believing that Mato Grosso it's a place to find these opportunities. So a lot of these partnerships were happening and helping the state to make progress to the goals. And the next phase that we are right now is the structure. So one thing is the strategy, you know, the actions and the things that we have to do, the public policies. And the other thing is structure. So we are providing PCI with a structure right now. We are calling the PCI Institute. So the purpose of this institute is actually to shelter the coalition of actors, to enable this coordination between public and private action. You know, to drive investments inside the jurisdiction. And we have the recognition of the government. In 2019, there was a transition in the state government. So this was a critical point for the state and for PCI. So we not only managed to survive the government transition, but the new government understood what PCI is and empowered the PCI Institute to have the function it has today. So the PCI Institute, if you look at the chart of the PCI Institute, we are creating something that is independent from the government. So this is not a government body, it's not an agent of the government. It's an institute that was founded by independent members. So we have companies like Amagi, Marfrig, IDH, Earth Innovation, AgroEconomy, all these organizations, they volunteered to start the PCI Institute. So they're the founding members, and the board of the PCI Institute is composed by these members and the government of Mato Grosso. So the government is part of the decision-making process, but he's not the owner of PCI, and that's something that guarantee the independence and the survival to political cycles. But also, you know, it's, we want to give more security to the investors and make sure this is a flexible and agile agents to drive investments into the jurisdiction. So we have also the consultative council. So all the stakeholders that were part of this, the beginning in the state committee, they are also part of this institute in the form of a consultative council. And we have a place also for donors and investors to follow that effort and to be part of the discussions. So this is the structure that we designed for PCI. And since last year, we are developing an action plan for the institute for the coming years. So that's the next steps that we are taking right now in 2020. So if we move it to the next slides, these are what we are planning to do with the institute. So the institute, as you saw, has two committees, the investment committee and the monitoring committee. on the monitoring committee, the plan is, like I said, to have this evaluation on how we are doing, you know, in relation to the targets of the PCI. What are the new priority actions that we need? How can we improve the monitoring of the PCI? We are collecting data at municipal level. Can we identify inside the territory of Mato Grosso what are the places that we need the action, you know, to reduce deforestation or to make everyone legal compliant? Where do we have to invest to intensify livestock, for example? So that's the idea of creating this territorial intelligence for Mato Grosso and connecting the state strategy to the local level, to the municipal level, where you can have local stakeholders acting together and helping to implement the strategy. So this is the plan that we have this year for the monitoring committee. And on the investment committee, I'm going to pass the word to IDH, that's coordinating the investment committee, so they can explain what the plan is and what the next steps are. Thank you.
Thanks, Fernando. Marcela, please, can you just bring how PCI investment committee is working to really catalyze public-private partnerships and engage other actors into an investment positive circle for the PCI from today to the future. Welcome.
Thank you, Fabiola. And just jumping into the investment committee, as explained to Fernando, this is a consultation body under the PCI Institute's governance framework, for which IDH was indicated as the coordinator by the PCI Institute founding members. So making a link with the former governance structure, the former working group for value engagement and communication from the PCI State Committee had its activities incorporated by the investment committee, and all the entities that were previously participating in the PCI State Committee were invited to be part of this new committee. So this is an opening space for discussion and construction. So the investment committee has a clear and objective role to attract new public and private investments to the PCI strategy. So, considering that there is a need to update the investment requirements to meet the targets under the PCI strategy, and also qualifying the types of resources, strategic interventions, and possible priorities for private actors' engagement in the strategy. In the fourth quarter of 2019, the Investment Committee has developed and approved the 2020 Action Plan that is based in 4 pillars. The pillar A, pipeline generation investment models. The pillar B, attracting public and private investors, which is a consequence of the previous one. The pillar C, priority companies, known by many of you as the Corporate Action Group. And the pillar D, measurement of investments related to the PCI. And now that we are in the implementation phase of this action plan, the first actions of the committee in 2020 are focused on the pillars A and C. For the pillar A, we are in the process for hiring a consultancy for the development of the investment opportunities in the state of Mato Grosso arising from the PCI strategy. This consultancy will be co-funded by the RAIN program in Mato Grosso and also by TFA. For the pillar C, the Corporate Action Group was redesigned under this new structure, led by EDF, to be a tool of engagement and communication for private sector players, and also to promote a good environment for cooperation and concrete contributions to the PCI strategy. This is in very short words, what is the investment committee, and now Kate from EDF will give more details on the Corporate Action Group. Thank you, Fabiola.
Thanks so much, Marcela, and thank you all for joining today and TFA for hosting us.
My name's Katie Anderson, and I'm with Environmental Defense Fund. And we just wanted to spend a few minutes talking specifically about how the PCI has been engaging companies so far and some of our key lessons learned. So, you know, Fernando laid out the really robust set of strategies and targets for the PCI. And in order to meet those targets, we need companies who are sourcing commodities from the region to get involved and align their supply chain efforts with the PCI strategy. So as we were thinking about how to better engage companies, we knew that some companies would be able to really participate in the governance specifically, but others needed other venues where they could connect to the PCI. And that's how we created the Corporate Action Group, which is really a venue to try to facilitate corporate engagement and on-the-ground actions within the PCI that support PCI goals, align company commitments with the jurisdictional approach in Mato Grosso, and create a good channel of feedback between companies and PCI membership. So we launched the Corporate Action Group in fall of 2018 and hosted a set of virtual discussions to provide overviews of the PCI and specific opportunities for action. We also hosted one-on-one meetings with key companies to talk about their specific supply chain needs and talk about how we might be able to work together collaboratively. And then, as you'll see in the next slide, we developed even a more concrete set of actions that companies might be able to take to support the PCI in the PCI pitch book, which was launched in May of 2019. And it's really kind of a menu of 11 priority projects that are ongoing in Mato Grosso, layer up into the PCI, and can help support both the company strategies as well as the Mato Grosso targets. In the pitch book, we provide an overview of each project, the commodities and objectives, and the specific ways that companies can support that project directly. And so to develop this was really a huge multi-stakeholder effort. We looked across all of the projects in Mato Grosso, identified 11 that met a certain set of criteria, and then worked collaboratively with TFA to support the design and publication, and launched it at the TFA event in Bogota last May in 2019. So if you are looking for ways to engage in the PCI, please feel free to start here as a helpful starting place, and we're also happy to help guide you as needed. As on the next slide, you can see that I think part of the goal of this webinar is also to share some of the lessons learned on how we've engaged companies with other jurisdictions that might be looking to do the same. And so here's just a couple of those from our perspective. I think first is really trying to build on-ramps so that companies can learn about the initiative as the first step. They may not go from, jurisdictional initiatives are sometimes a new idea. And so getting them in the door and learning is a really helpful kind of on-ramp for companies. Also, I think getting as concrete as possible about how companies can engage is really helpful. I think given the complexity of jurisdictional initiatives, this isn't always that straightforward, but thinking about what does the region need, what can companies realistically and feasibly do to support that, and where do those overlap? And then trying to help to present that clearly to companies is helpful. Third is aligning. Fernando talked a lot about how we aligned across the multi-stakeholder group. I think the goal of the investment committee and the corporate action group is to make sure the whole PCI is aligned about how we're going to go to companies and what we want to present to them, so that there's no confusion or mixed messages. And then last, where possible, it's helpful to provide match funding through opportunities like Red Plus or other funding mechanisms to help to catalyze private sector investment. So as we're looking ahead, we're really focusing on how to engage companies moving forward, and we'll be re-engaging the corporate action group. I'm having a series of online sessions to talk about how to get involved. So if you would like to participate in that, please do reach out to us. We'll also continue conducting one-on-one outreach and advocacy to companies to help with engagement and actions. And then we'll be summarizing and highlighting the company actions that have occurred to date and thinking about how companies might be able to make claims about PCI or use PCI language in their corporate sustainability reporting in a way that aligns with PCI's broader communication strategy. So we really hope that this has been helpful, and if you're a company and you're looking for ways to get involved, please feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to get you plugged in. Now back to Fabiola.
Thank you, Katie. This is true. No, I think that looking to the future, no, from the history to today to the future, the engagement of private sector, the engagement of investors in models that are really, really useful, no, and to attend the whole challenge will be crucial, no, more and more. So I will now back to Dan. How then do you see, you know, what's going next? What's in the frontier, you know, of PCI, and also PCI as a model, no, of jurisdictional programs? So tell us, please, what do you see as the next steps?
Thank you, Fabiola. And first of all, let's just start with the point that the farmers of Mato Grosso in general are still frustrated. They still are waiting for that positive signal from the world, the recognition, but also the financial recognition that their efforts in conserving forests and their contribution to Mato Grosso's success will be recognized and at some level rewarded. And these new initiatives that Governor Mauro Mendes, himself a businessman, himself very devoted to efficiency, seeing things move forward, has really embraced as part of his agenda for the coming years. One is to take all of those emissions reductions that Mato Grosso is achieving, which are nested within Brazil's broader program for the Amazon and the Cerrado, recognized, defined by reference levels that are approved by the UNFCCC, translate those into investments. There's an exploding market and demand for emissions reductions. And right here in San Francisco, 150 companies are now committed to be climate neutral. And some of them are saying, we want to buy offsets from jurisdictional programs. They all need to buy offsets that are verified, and Mato Grosso is not yet there. So part of this agenda of translating Mato Grosso's success in reducing deforestation and reducing emissions into investments is to become verified under the Tropical Forest Standard of California, but also the Norwegian trees standard. These are jurisdictional standards that would give the investors that confidence that what they're getting has value behind it. This is an agenda that is very much active together with the Ministry of Environment. A lot of the pieces are in place, but there are a few things that need to be done at the federal level and within the state for this market to really flow. One of the major tech companies here in San Francisco has already stated that it will buy its emissions reductions from Mato Grosso as soon as they're verified for jurisdictional emissions reductions. So that could become a very interesting new flow of finance into the state that could reach farmers, the critical audience that is yet to be rewarded. Another way of translating Mato Grosso's success in lowering deforestation is to be the first state to offer at scale carbon neutral commodities. And this means basically reducing emissions on farm as much as possible, taking what's remaining embedded in the carbon and offsetting that with a chunk of the emissions reductions achieved statewide, all of it recognized by the federal government. This is an agenda supported by Mauro Mendes. It's embraced by Minister Teresa Cristina, the Minister of Agriculture, and the Minister Ricardo Salles of MMA. Can Brazil really bring this into negotiations with China that's worried about what's going on in the Amazon? Can it bring it into the EU negotiations, and as the EU prepares to create a new law next year that would define the requirements of its commodity imports in terms of embedded deforestation and greenhouse gas emissions? Third, there's a very big problem. One way to reward farmers is to make it easier to do business. A soy farm typically has to have 20, 25 licenses. They become due at different times of the year. It's a huge bureaucratic burden to remain compliant with the law. not to mention the Forest Code itself. And so we're supporting the governor to look at some ways of making regulatory implementation more efficient, to make Mato Grosso a good place to be a farmer and a good place to do business more generally. And this could mean accelerating validation of the car. Right now, the car processes, the car environmental rural registries are being validated at the rate of a couple per day. It'll take tens of years to complete the state. That needs to be automated, that needs to be accelerated so that Mato Grosso can finally have that clarity around legal compliance. And finally, I'll leave you with a question, and then we'll turn it back to Fernando, which is, why isn't, if Mato Grosso is achieving all of its targets and hitting those targets, the entire state moving towards zero net deforestation, shouldn't there be a flood of companies, a flood of investors wanting to do business here? And shouldn't all production coming out of Mato Grosso be considered sustainable and good to go to market? And that's the question I leave for Fernando's next remark. Thank you.
Fernando, please, you can start.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Well, I think it goes on the same direction of recognition. You know, when you talk about business, of course, most of the business wants to run away from the risk, and that's how Mato Grosso is perceived today, as a risky situation. And we want to make sure that people know that's progress being made in the state, and that we are, you know, we have this huge effort and we are making progress in our targets. So we have been working this concept of a verified sourcing area with IDH. We already have 3 pilots running in Mato Grosso in 3 different regions in Mato Grosso. But the idea is that 10 years from now, most of the PCI targets are for 2030, that we have the entire state as a verified sourcing area, meaning that not that we have all the problems solved, but that we have the governance, that we have the monitoring, we are making progress, and to make sure that business comes here to help Mato Grosso on that trajectory, not to avoid Mato Grosso, but willing to come here to help us make and accelerate that progress. So the idea of this verified sourcing areas is a way, you know, it's like a clearinghouse to show to the international markets and business what's being done here as a jurisdictional initiative. And that one day we actually have, you know, everyone legal compliant, no illegality happening, no conflict, and that everyone can verify that and can consult the sources that we have for the monitoring. And we are starting that right now with IDH, of course, in the 3 regions that I mentioned, but the idea is that we can expand this for the whole Mato Grosso, and we have this status of the verified sourcing area in the future. So before I go back to you, Fabiola, just let me say thank you to all the organizations that are part of the PCI effort and that are not speaking here today, but you know, this is a collective movement, and I always have the help of many people inside the government, outside the government, that wants to make this happen. So a big thanks, and to TFA also for this event today. Thank you.
Thanks, Fernando. We have 8 minutes left for the Q&A, but in some way, Dan, you already started the Q&A. Thank you. I will continue with you, Fernando, bringing 2 questions that are related with the dialogue that you just had with Dan right now, but bringing another perspective. First. This is, it's a question from Natalie Lecoq. Like it was mentioned earlier that incentives are not arriving to farm gate level. what are the impediments? Can you expand on this? No, I think this is very crucial for us if you can bring, but I will also ask you to answer in together with another question that has all so relation with this. It's done by Jonathan Gorman. He asked like how much the market is really picking up the costs of the program. So it's again, no, there's a possibility to really co-share the costs of the program, and beyond the program, no, all the investments, public and private investments that needs to be done to really have the program implemented or the targets achieved, no, because we know that it's pretty much more than the cost of the program itself. It's the cost of a new model, no, a new model of agriculture and business, no. So can you just bring a few thoughts about that, and then we will in 1 minute, if it's possible, to have time to other questions that are here.
Yeah, I mean, about the costs is exactly what the investment committee will try to develop. You know, the consultants that we are hiring is to help us to define investment models that make attractive to private investors, and also how we can match these different funds that we want to attract to Mato Grosso. Maybe you have, for example, grant money that can be used for technical assistance, and you have, in another way, credit that can help the farmers to improve the practices that they are applying. So the investment committee is actually busy with defining these different models. What kind of money do we need? How we combine different types of investments, and you know, share the costs of PCI implementation. We are talking about, you know, credit money from the banks, grant money from donors, private investments, the investments from the farmers themselves. They are investing a lot every year, and you have the procurement from the company. So every year, all the people that's buying beef or soy in Mato Grosso, it's putting a lot of money in Mato Grosso. So how we can use that power to you know, to direct this money to help the evolution of the states towards the goals that we have set. So that's the idea that we are developing right now. And I'm sorry, Fabiola, the other question was about the government alignment.
Sorry, here. I think that I am a mute. So I think that Dan can also help us on the question. The other question, comment, no, this one, but also the other question is how the market is really co-sharing the costs and the perceiving this as a potential investment. No, so maybe back in your question to Fernando, to you then, and bring in also other elements about the question regarding the incentives to the farms.
Yeah, I think it's a great set of questions, and the farmer who keeps more forest on his land today, that farm is worth a lot less than his neighbor, his or her neighbor, who has cleared way more forest than they're supposed to legally. And that reality continues. The soy moratorium was a chance, I think, to recognize legal compliance and say those farmers should get benefits. We missed that opportunity. The soy moratorium basically locks in farms where they're at. And there's been a reluctance. You know, the German contract with Mato Grosso for the Red for Early Movers program said, you know, we can get some enabling conditions for farmers, but there's really not enough money to go to the medium and large scale farmers. The private carbon investments have not flowed at scale to farmers. So that's part of their frustration. That's sort of the missing piece. I think we're moving into a decarbonized economy. I think all the suppliers who are buying commodities and are looking at scope 3 sort of accountability. What if Mato Grosso started supplying you with carbon neutral commodities so that you can advance into this new reality? What could you give in return as a company? And I think that's sort of the missing piece. Currently, the tropical deforestation agenda has placed a lot of demands on the productive sector without really coming up with the ways of incentivizing that in a positive way on the ground. I think with the emerging carbon market, we have a chance to do that perhaps, hopefully.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Last question, and it's a shame, no, but it's very important here, a question from Alexandre Kosoy, asking if the question to Fernando, no, is PCI Institute sees feasible the state's objective of long-term, and how PCI and SEMA, the environmental secretary of Mato Grosso state, is working together to guarantee that these goals will be accomplished. Very short answer, sorry.
Yeah, you know, the government has two priorities at the SEMA right now. So one is to tackle illegality. So there's a huge effort from the environmental secretary to actually stop illegal deforestation in Mato Grosso that accounts for more than 80% of all the deforestation happening in the state. So there's a lot of investment being directed to the control of illegality and command and control actions. We have a new satellite system with rapid alert from deforestation, teams on the ground, call service for, you know, detecting this illegal deforestation. So that's one big pillar of the work of the government. And the second one is about the implementation of the forest code. So there's a big task force of people that is now at SEMA analyzing all the CARs, the Rural Environmental Register from the farmers in Mato Grosso, to accelerate that. And I think that this is an effort that, you know, is bigger than any other state in Brazil. We are trying to accelerate the analysis of the CAR, so really start the forest restoration and the regularization of all the production in Mato Grosso as a result of this action. So these are the two big pillars of the government actions right now to really decouple the production from deforestation.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Unfortunately, we are over the time. All the questions here will be recorded, and then we will try to ask and give a way to answer to you in specifically. But thanks a lot for all of you, the speakers, for all of you who have participated and stayed with us until now. And yeah, this is an onboarding process, no? So you are fully invited to join on the process and on the dialogue from today to the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.